Welcome to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. I'm Elizabeth Townsend Gard, your host. I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School, and I just wanna quilt. So today we have a famous quilter in the house, literally in the house. Mary-fons is back. She is here to chat with us. She's in town for other things, and she sits down for us for about an hour and a half. We also have my kid, Sid. She comes in to join us, and so did Ron, my spouse. So it's like a family affair. It's so awesome. Anyway, Mary, as always, so incredible. I can't wait for you to hear the interview. All right, so today, Mary-fons has come back to the house. It's so cool. So cool. And she's willing to chat with us because she's here in town for other things, but she came by the house, and we're so excited. So first, we're going to talk about you and all. I titled this All About Mary. So that would be the first thing, All About Mary, because last time it was really fun, and everybody loved. I mean, like, I still get, like, tons of people loved the two of you together. Good. You and Tula, like, crazy. And people like Tula, don't get me wrong, but they love you.
Really?
Like, they're like the comments and just, like, yeah.
I don't read the comments on anything.
I don't either, actually. Do you?
Can't.
No. I can't. No, I don't read.
No.
I don't. Yeah.
It's very good to hear that they're good, but like anybody else I know, there's going to be one that's bad.
I know,
and it's
right?
the only one I will see.
Me too. And I will see it. Like, I felt I accidentally saw one yesterday, and they were like, they were right. That's the worst part. It's like, it's usually they're right. They're like, she needs to be better prepared and stop eating during the interviews. I was like, oh, I did eat a yogurt. It's true. Totally.
Well, maybe
you don't understand the schedule, right? It was like that was the only time to eat the yogurt. Like,
really funny.
Like
This
over
is my
scheduling,
truth.
right?
I eat yogurt.
So yeah, I felt really bad about myself, but I knew it was true.
Yeah.
It was so true.
Sometimes they're like, she talks too fast, and I'm like, yes, I do.
true.
I do. I may today.
Okay, so we're going to talk all about you and about quilting, and then we're going to bring in Ron,
Great.
Ron, to talk about cultural. You guys to chat because I think they will have some fun talking about sort of what is this thing that we are doing. And I'm really at a really strange space because it's been now a year of immersion, and it's cool and wonderful and loving and really weird. Yeah. So I'm really curious to sort of see how the two of you talk about this thing. And because you're doing all historical stuff and sort of your angle on it and sort of the commercialism and getting back to sort of what it means and all that. So that's kind of the idea for
There's
the time.
nothing on this earth I would rather do than be here now and talking about
Really?
these things. Yes.
Aw.
I mean, I eat it, drink it, sleep it, breathe it, love it. Quilt culture in America is it's fascinating, and it's endlessly fascinating. And the more I learn about it, the more I want to learn. And it's like, oh my God, the whole world opened up to me when I started really actually looking.
And when did you think you actually started looking?
It was when I was disillusioned with my former career track, basically, working under the auspices of my mother's former company. And certainly I won't run them down, although I spoke pretty frankly in an article recently about new magazine closures have happened. But it was when I realized I had been used to keep my mother around. After she and Liz sold the business in 2006, they had a contract to be involved in the business for about 3 years or so. And so when I started making quilts around 2008, before I got sick and during when I was sick, there's many details I'll leave out. But basically, Liz, once her contract was done, she was like, see ya. And Mom was also ready to do that. But I had started quilting. And the powers that be at Fons and Porter were like, what are we going to do now? And then Fons the Younger was making quilts. So it was like, come here, my pretty. Do you want to make quilts? Do you want to be on the show? And so I was like, yeah. I was a freelance writer and a performer in Chicago, and I was
this
making
is an opportunity,
my living.
right?
Yeah, it was a gig. It was a gig. I was super into quilting, so I did it. And now I see and realized maybe 4 years ago or so that I was a pawn I was a pawn. But I'm okay with it. What happened was I really did fall in love with quilting. It was a gig, but I actually legitimately fell head over heels, not just with the quilt as an object, but with the quilt as a concept, and the quilt as a form that is truly sort of the key to everything. Like, quilts are an angle for me to access the entire world, history,
really
this country, people, philosophy,
right.
everything, art.
And that's what you're doing. I mean,
Precisely.
that's what your whole life is
Precisely.
right now.
Yeah. So exactly. So,
but that wasn't what you were doing with them. So you were doing a television show, and that was feeding the business to buy. Like, it is out sort of. Why do you feel like you were a pawn? Because I think that's an interesting word. Because, and some people would say, well, you had huge opportunity and you were on television and like it made your career. So why do you feel that way?
I would say, well, my mother has told me, and told them too, that she stayed because of me. I mean, she stayed on TV because I was there.
Because of an opportunity for you.
Well, not even just that. She wasn't trying to like, she wasn't like trying to help me, because I didn't even know I wanted help. I mean, I didn't grow up thinking, I want to take over the thing. I didn't. I fell into it because I got sick, I got married, I got divorced. I started quilting on my own at 28. And so it was kind of like, this natural thing, except they pushed me along. I mean, I was not ready to teach people how to quilt on television. What I was able to do, because I never lied and said that I could, I was always myself. I was always the rookie. I didn't know what I was doing, and I asked the dumb questions. People were furious that I was on the show because I was a rookie. I moved my hands too much, and I've been quilting for 25 years. I can't learn from a beginner. You can have preferences about what voices you like to listen to. You can have like, oh, I just can't stand this radio announcer or whatnot. That's okay. You can not like me on TV, but it's wrong to say you can't learn from a beginner, because I learned from every beginner I've ever taught. They have some wonderful question. Why do you do it like that? Oh, I don't know. Why do you? But mom stayed because we love each other. We love working together. I mean, parent-child relationships are complicated, but I genuinely respect this woman, and she genuinely respects me. And we have fun. She's funny. My mother is so funny. And together we really cut up, as my grandma would say. So we had a good time. It was steady work. I was always a contractor. I was never an employee.
Interesting.
And that led to a lot of pain, because
explain that in case people don't understand what you just said. Why is that important?
Well, I didn't own, if I was an employee, I wouldn't have owned any of the work I made for that company. Mm-hmm. But as a contractor, I paid my own taxes, and I didn't have health insurance. I was not lay-offable. I had a contract that could end, and certainly did. But I had freedom, which is very important to me. I've been a freelancer since 2005, writing, performing, gigging as a poet, as a writer, and as a quilt teacher, So my life is W-2s and 1099s, But what was also true is that I could sign a contract that was maybe not so great. And I had a non-compete clause in my contract, which was very, very difficult.
It's so funny because I talked to Alex Anderson, and she had the same thing when they didn't renew her on HGTV.
Oh, I knew about that. Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And then she had this non-compete clause, so that's why they went to the internet, because it didn't have its thing there. But it's just so interesting that that's important. I mean, to see it twice like that, I thought was really interesting, that it changed the direction of who you were.
Yes.
The non-compete clause it's supposed to keep you from competing with whatever it is that but in fact it made you stronger in some way, right? And for her as well. So I thought that was really interesting.
And what you just said is true. I hope it doesn't sound like grandstanding or whatever, but I mean, I have this understanding of my life in the quilt world as being under extraordinary pressure for a lot of years in the public eye, learning how to do all of this in front of everyone. I can't even imagine.
Because I went to, we were talking about Vermont. Yeah. We went to this quilt, and I realized I was super private about quilting. Yeah. And I can't imagine. For me, I would, because you make your mistakes in front of everybody, right? And people are judging, and right, a lot of. So, did you feel like you got stronger?
Well, yeah. I mean, I felt like I said, it's maybe a little bit. I don't mean to say I'm a diamond, but in terms of the pressure I was under at this point, I am bursting out all over. I mean, like, I am free of those contracts. I am free of the company. I am free. I mean, I just made a quilt called Free Quilt. I mean, it's like I'm free to be as weird and as
because that was the other
thinky.
thing, right? It was very structured, and it was structured very. I mean, it wasn't. That's the other part
Every
of it, right?
quilt I have made until a year ago. I mean, every quilt I ever made in the first 10 years of my experience as a quilter was bound for television, literally, right? Play on words, but it was for a magazine, it was for a TV show, it was for a class, it was for something.
You were always a professional quilter from the beginning, which is
crazy.
Really
no one
interesting.
Should do that. No one should do it.
Interesting.
Don't ever do it. Anyone out there, don't do it. But I'm grateful because now all of the dogma, if you will, like I grew up in the church, right? Oh, I've never thought about it like this. I grew up in the church. It was a very, very strict household, you know, very, all these things I had to do, these like, you know, rituals and whatever. And I'm like a heathen now. I'm like, I'm off. I've gone away. I'm the prodigal daughter. And what I'm finding on the road now.
Yeah. What are you finding on the road?
Oh God.
So Quiltfolk Magazine is taking you everywhere. And you focus, we know each other because of the Louisiana episode issue. I keep saying episode, but issue. And you go all over the place. Amazing, right?
Editor-in-chief, it's true.
Right.
But you know, beyond that, Elizabeth, it's like Quiltfolk is a huge part of this, and so is this documentary series that I'm working on. We can talk about too. But philosophically, and I won't get too like esoteric or weird or whatever, but I mean, I have gone off the rails in terms of the commercialization of the quilt industry, of the quilt.
Yeah.
And
that's what we're going to be talking to Ron about later.
It's a problem. We're in a post-revival period. I believe that. A post-revival period.
A post-revival period of, tell us more what you think that means.
Well, the Great American Quilt Revival. There were two revivals of quilt making in America in the 20th century. The first one was the Colonial Revival in the 1920s and into the 30s before the Great Depression, which was weird because total misnomer, colonial revival. I mean, there was nothing colonial about a patchwork quilt. They didn't make quilts in the colonies. Like, there was no fabric. Anyway, so that was weird. But the second revival was in the 1970s, the bicentennial.
Right, and your mom's part of that, right?
Without,
like, it's
exactly.
huge.
That's why we're all here.
That's right.
Okay, that's why we're all here. The bicentennial and the Whitney exhibit and all these different things. So, but we are in a period of decline. And it might not feel like it to someone who starts quilting today,
right?
But the innovation, the weirdness, the quilts used to be way weirder than they are now. And sure, there's some weird ones, but the jelly roll, die cut, fabric group, fabric line collection thing, this is the kits. I mean, they have really lowered the level of innovation and original thought amongst quilters. I think the moderns, they're doing a good job, but I feel like it's not as secure as we think it is, and it's because we've been sold too much stuff. We have look at the magazines that are closing. You can see it crumbling. The guilds, some of the guilds are falling away. Some of that's normal, but these magazine closures, these fabric companies, these huge leviathans, to bringing them to their knees.
Well, people were saying to me that their guilds were founded when the guild members were in their 30s, and now they're in their 60s, 70s, and that it'll be interesting to see if the guilds continue because there's a kind of they're all getting older kind of thing. There are certain younger guilds, but like that is interesting too. That they start in the revival period, and now the question is what will happen now. Now you've got all the weirdness of what we're seeing in our project, which is huge Facebook groups, Facebook, like 30,000, 100,000 people, and these gargantuan groups that it's moved into the internet space and all of that. So it'll be interesting again to see what that is. Now, so we've talked about you before. So, but before we get on to like the quilting thing, who like I think that you are like so interesting because you share a lot. You are totally connected to people. You're super nice, and there's still like this really interesting like who is Mary, right?
Good.
You know, like
a woman of mystery.
Totally, woman of mystery. And then all the writing that you do. Like I think like do you feel like your world is like how important is writing still to you in terms of like your process or who you are? Because you do so much talking and you do so much connecting with people, but where does writing fit into that? Who you are?
Thanks for asking that. That's like the most important question.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking. Writing is how I order reality. I cannot understand the world. I am overwhelmed. It's absurd to me. I'm like borderline nihilistic, which is very bad and scary. But I can't.
Is there a writer that isn't? I'm
if there, you know what? I'll tell you.
Is it like? Are you drawn? I'm just serious. Like, you know, like.
I mean, if you're,
I don't know.
Say, if you're a real writer, and
is there a happy writer out there?
I think if you are a real writer, and what I mean by that is, if you are born, I mean, I don't mean anything about good. There are writers who are bad, but they're real writers. And if you are a real writer, you can't make sense of the world unless you write it down. And I have to write it down. I mean, I looked up the word like hyperhagiography or something like that, where it's really a problem where you're writing and writing and writing.
Yeah.
Because I write and write and write and write. But that's something else. That's you're like scribbling on a full page of paper, like tiny, tiny lines.
Oh my gosh.
Like, it's not
Ron, you don't know this about her. Ron and Sid are in the room, so just in case people. And Sid is my kid, and Ron is my guy. For your master's thesis, did you say that is it like 1,900 pages long?
1,500.
1,500 pages long of like everything she wrote for like 2 years, and it totally makes me like you must be the new Ulysses. Like, I mean, I just feel like you do you know what I mean? Like, I really like everybody should like.
It didn't even include my journal.
See,
and if I'm a woman of mystery,
oh my gosh.
It's because I write because I can't live without it. The quickest way to make me go crazy and kill myself. I mean, it's dark, right? Is to take away a paper and pen. I will not be able to. It would be the worst. It would a fate worse than death. So, if I'm a woman of mystery, it's because I keep 2 sets of books.
You keep 2 sets of books.
I do. I have a journal, and I've written this journal. I have it in my bag now. I write in a journal constantly, all the time, on planes, and I'm on planes a lot. And I love to write in my journal on planes. I write everywhere. I write in it everywhere on the train and all kinds of places at home. But, that journal, if that journal got out, and there's volumes of it, it is scandalous.
Now you're just like baiting people
it's
to like
scandalous.
break into your house.
Well, I mean, I'd go to jail. I would, my family would be. I mean, I don't know if it's a double. Well, it was a double life for a while. I mean, I was a single woman. Oh God, I'm really talking about it now. But here I was like hosting PBS, a quilting show on public television, and sometimes I would look into the camera and I was like, I have no idea. They have no idea that, like, I'm this bachelorette living in downtown Chicago, and, like, my wild weekend last weekend before I flew to Iowa to, like, film this show. And I loved it. I love that.
You loved the double life.
Yeah, I mean, because I wasn't hurting people, I hope. But, I mean, I don't know. I'm a very curious person. I'm interested in the world, and I cannot be caged, man.
In a good way. I mean, in a good way. I mean, I think that's your charm, right? That it's like you're interesting. Now, as a writer, so I write for my job. My job is writing. I know it doesn't seem like it, but like that's all the dean cares about is like, well, what are you writing? So I have to convince him I'm writing all the time,
many
which
books,
I am. But sort of your process. So you talk about like writing in your journal. Is writing different, like when you're writing an article versus writing maybe a script for something or whatever you're doing? Like how is the process similar or different in your what it means to be a writer for you?
When I'm making something for public consumption, I compose out loud. So I will sit down in my chair and I will...
That's really interesting. Because you can hear your voice in your... And you were talking in your blog about that it's for... In your blog you say, this is for public consumption. I'm writing for an audience. My journal's not an audience.
Correct.
Like you say that in there. Right. So you recognize that you've got the... You're writing for an audience.
That's right. So, I mean, what's difficult, I mean, I've taught a blog class at the University of Chicago several times. I teach at the writing place there, the Graham School, not often, but when I can. And the thing that I tell my blog readers, which gets to the point about how I compose and how I write differently, I mean, I've had a blog, and I am taking a bit of a hiatus now, which is really scary for me, but I've had it for like 12 years. And the reason that I've had it for 12 years is because I don't write the blog for me. It's not for me. It's for you. It's for you, and it's for her, and it's for her, and it's for her. If you write a blog for yourself, if you write a blog that is a diary, no one cares. You will not be able to sustain it, and it's bad. Because my diary, my journal, even though it's a fabulous read, it's for me. It's not for you. So I have no care about you in my journal. This is what it's supposed to be. But if I have the audacity to want you to read something that I've written, if I want to take your time and put something in front of you and take your time out of your life to read this, I have a duty to make it
interesting and decent, yeah,
and to share, to give to you.
You know, it's so funny. I used to have to blog. I blogged early in 2004, which got me to the job I got to because I was blogging. I know that's important, right? Yeah,
that's awesome.
Then I stopped because they made me do this really dumb blog at school about how like it was not scary to be in New Orleans after Katrina because I was a girl with a young child and a family and all that. So every day I was like, we went to the Walmart and it was awesome and it wasn't scary at all.
Sponsored content.
Exactly, for 2 years. So now I hate blogging because I just feel like I find like, and so I think that's interesting when I look at your blog because what it does when I read your blog, I say, oh, it's sort of, I keep up with you. And I think you've got a fan base and you've got like people that are interested in who you are. And it gives a little snippet, but even in the writing, it's clear that you're letting us in a little bit. But it isn't like, oh, now I know like what detergent you wear.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
Like
it's interesting. I mean, you let us in enough that we feel like it's an authentic voice.
Yes, it is authentic.
Right?
That's so important to say. It's authentic. It's sincere.
Yeah.
But it's not appropriate. And it's funny. Like I'm talking about this double life, and like, what does she mean? You know, S&M or something like that. And so I mean, I don't know about that, but but it's really true that like it's not appropriate for me to talk about my bodily functions. To some extent, I talk about the chronic illness because it's people need to hear it. But like to whine about this or that or to air dirty laundry.
It's a professional blog.
And the thing is, once again, it's not for me. It's for you. You don't want to hear that. You don't. And it's just not classy. So it's true. It's sincere, but it is one voice, and that's the problem because there's a Quiltfolk editor, letter,
right? You've
voice.
got a lot of voices, right?
And to me, this is like flexing as a writer. It's exciting to write a section intro for the Louisiana issue of Quiltfolk. It's exciting to write a blog post about how I tripped and fell in the gutter, because it's hilarious and it happened. It's different for me to write about the date I had with my painter, the other night in my journal. And so for me, and then it's different to write a poem. So if a writer is really a writer, this is irresistible to have these different things. And one last thing about the blog. If you are a real writer out there, fie to anyone who says, and it's okay if you don't like writing the blog, but a blog, if you are doing it right, if you are giving a gift every time, is some of the best writing practice, the best writing.
Oh, that's right. It's huge.
And it doesn't get legit, it's not legit, right? Because it's not on paper, like whatever. I have instant access to people who are reading me daily, and I have to practice my scales, like if I played the violin.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just think it's out of I know it's like I should be right. You know what I mean? Like, I just know it's out of, it's whatever. It's like my whatever. But
you have to keep doing it because the death of a blog is inconsistency.
Yeah.
You have to keep
totally.
doing it. You can't not do it and then sometimes do it.
Yeah. Writing. So do you feel like you write every day?
Yeah.
You do.
Without a doubt.
And for those that want to be writers, what does it mean to be a writer?
Well,
does that make sense? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
I think that you can't. It's just really hard. It's so hard.
Writing
Think
is
about
hard.
it. It's like,
how
do you think? It's a nightmare. How do you think? How do you speak? It's a nightmare. Then how do you think? And then put it down in words that you can't. Like, it's chaos. To try to put an article together without mistakes that is true, that is interesting, and then is in print forever. Just gird up your loins, folks, because it is a terrifying prospect.
And you've done that constantly. I mean, you've done that constantly. Yeah. As much as you're in the public light for quilting, you've been a writer and a professional writer in the quilting world forever now. Yeah. And it's pretty remarkable. And the pieces are so consistent. That's what I think is really interesting. And your voice is there, but it's informative, and you're trying to let people into different aspects of the world, which is also true with Quiltfolk, that, it is really remarkable. You really are our voice at the moment of trying to make sense of all of these things. I think so. Who else is doing that? So? Who else is doing that?
That means a huge,
right?
That's fantastic.
I mean, really, who else?
And not just me, but you mean Quiltfolk, right?
I mean you, and I mean Quiltfolk, but I think you.
Oh, well,
because I mean,
nice.
also, Quiltfolk is important, no doubt. But you're going deeper, and you're making these connections, and you're writing in other spaces beyond Quiltfolk as well.
Well, that's extremely flattering, and I will take, I don't know if I can accept that, but I will say that for every movement, every cultural zeitgeist, whatever, there is usually a publication. There's usually a print publication, or there's media that shapes the time, like Pravda, like the Russian, propaganda paper or whatever.
Well, Quiltfolk is like making it
yes,
it's like a thing.
Quiltfolk is that thing, magazine,
right?
It's the vanguard,
right?
It's the magazine that will galvanize what I think is coming next in the quilt world, which is people.
Which is people and not product. Yeah. So that's interesting. So Ron, as we're going to transition a little bit, but what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about what I'm finding this year and try to understand what it is.
Great.
I can't really what is this? So, first of all, wait, before we do that, your mom, your family, we have to have an interview your mom. So anything I should ask your mom? What should I talk to your mom about? And tell me about your mom, because it's weird to have a mom. I think about us, well, first of all, I've worked a lot with my husband, and that's really interesting. We actually do a lot of fighting when we work together. Yeah. We are really great, and also we don't fight about anything else except the sentence that we have to sort of decide on. Yeah. But tell me about your mom. Tell me about your mom and both professional and regular mom time.
Single mom. My father was just not a great guy. Total narcissist. That word gets thrown around a lot, but really though, just an adulterer. I learned that word very early when way too early,
it's really hard.
A very young kid knows the word adultery, it was this terrible thing, but he just couldn't stop doing that to my mother. They were married 19 years. She tried and tried. He's, manic depressive, bipolar person, but he never drank. He never hit us. He didn't, abuse us in that way, but abandonment and pain and suffering there.
That's really hard.
Yeah, it was hard. So I have two sisters, one older and one younger. And so when I was in fourth grade, I didn't take the bus home. I got a note to go to the library after school, and my mother was waiting there, and my sisters showed up, and she was like, we're not going home. We're not going to go back to the farm. We're going to stay with some friends. Wow. And we were homeless for a while because she left Dad. And so we stayed with friends. We were farmed out to different houses. It was so awful. So we finally got a house, and this was before my mother's success, before the big book. It was hard. And so then, I remember the day that the Quilter's Complete Guide came out, and she got an advance, and we were able to go school shopping, and she got a minivan. So she raised us on her own, and there was she was gone a lot, and we had checks for the Pizza Hut and the grocery store left. She did teaching trips like I do now, or like I did till recently. She was teaching in church basements, just like I have done for the past few years, But I don't have kids. I don't even have a houseplant, So Mom did her thing. She built an empire.
And it was it's literally. There's all this empire building, but she was the first, that
she was
crowd,
among the
right?
first, yeah.
Among the first
Without
that
are
we still have empire. We have the second generation empire builders, which are the Jenny Doans and the Tula Pinks and all that.
Right.
But if your mom and her generation hadn't built those first ones, we wouldn't have what we have today.
No,
right?
This is the revival stuff. This is Eleanor Burns, Fons and Porter, Georgia Bonesteel, but she was sort of the Fons and Porter, So you have all these big businesses, and they started then, and a lot of them were started by women. A lot of them at their kitchen table. Bonnie Lehman started Quilter's newsletter at her kitchen table.
Amazing.
And so so they did it. I didn't start making quilts because quilts were what my mom did for work. it was magazine deadlines, and it was quilting under a deadline. So it was never appealing to me. I loved quilts, but I didn't want to make one. I was writing. I was writing all the time.
And then with this, which I want to sort of get Ron into, so this is the 70s, and we need you to come over this way because we're kind of getting back into this. I guess maybe we can wait because I want to ask about mom stuff, but come this way. I'm being such a dork.
I like it. You're like, I want to ask this, but wait, I want to ask this.
Yeah. Okay. So you worked with your mom. Your mom built an empire. So what is mom like as mom? Is that a hard? We talked with this with Tula. Both of you had single working moms, and so you learned independence and you learned sort of all those things. But
my mom, I love her so much, and sometimes I think she doesn't know what to do with me. I brood You know, like my dad would brood, only I've got half my mom going on in me, so I've got my feet on the ground. But I mean, my mother is, you know, chipper to the death. To her dying day, she will be chipper, and I'm much more, much sadder in general. I mean, I'm an optimist. I'm happy, but like I've seen some stuff. My chronic, you know, I had an ostomy bag, you know, for years, you know, and like cleaned my own intestines. I mean, really. Right. So that, you know, you don't come back from that kind of thing.
Do you think the sadness comes from the
Sorry,
illness?
I just like threw that in there, but
totally
it's true.
Okay. No, but it's interesting because I have chronic illness from forever.
Yeah.
So does my kid. Is that where the sadness comes? Like, do you see the world in a different way because of being ill, do you think? Like, we were talking about this last night, right? Like how does being that, how does your body, like, hurt, like, how does that change you?
Well, I told the girls yesterday, we're on a Quiltfolk trip to Vermont, and I said, the way it's changed me, because they asked the same thing, nothing is a crisis. Nothing is a crisis until you clean, you know, until you clean your own shit off of your body that is open when your ostomy bag is broken in your bed and you wake up in it, and then it happens again the same night.
Right.
Until you dealt with that, like, nothing's a crisis. So if you're in a bad mood, like, deal with it. It's not that you can't be in a bad mood, but it's like if people are fighting at work, if there's like a negative, it's like, stop. No, you're dismissed. Deal with it and come back to me, because I will not get caught up in drama. I will not deal with your petty little things. Like, this is not a crisis. I could tell you war stories. Just
you don't even know.
Roll with it, man. Like, roll with it. It's all good, because this isn't bad. It's not bad.
It's not bad.
I could tell you about bad, but I won't, you know, but it's okay. So I'm very chill, actually, as much as I have a lot of energy, but I'm very chill, very flexible.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the one thing too I want to mention that you said to me, Elizabeth, the last time I was here, or the last time I saw you, we were talking about chronic illness with you too, Sid. Yeah. And you were like, you can do whatever you want.
You can do whatever you want.
What? And you were like, yeah. After all that, you can do whatever you want. Whatever you want to do, you can do. I was like, great.
It's true, though. You've earned it. Yeah. I really do think that. Yeah. And also, like, we think, both Sid and I have talked about this, you are, like, we see you are heroic in our, like people don't understand if they have beautiful bodies that work all the time. Right. That's fabulous.
That's great.
I do not have one of those, and my kid does not.
Same.
And your schedule and your pace and your choice of life, like, you know, we talk about, like, you know, the Alexander Hamilton, the thing of, like, writing like you're running out of time, right?
Yes, exactly.
There's a sense of, like, Sid was like, I was like, you know, I'm not sure why I work so hard. And she's like, well, because you don't think your body's going to like, it's going to fail you tomorrow.
Precisely.
So, like, there's this kind of pushing to,
it all
like,
makes sense,
right?
When you look at it. And with my mom,
so interesting.
And with my mom, just to return to that, to answer your question, is my mom.
We did have a question.
Well, yeah, and, you know, it's weird. It's a weird circular way back, but she is a minimizer, and she'll say that. So for me, like, how is she as a mom? Like, you know, it's sort of like, well, you just got to get back up and get to work, you know, and that can be hard. So in my adulthood, I've returned to some of that unattended sorrow that I had as a child, and of course, poetically, that I ate my guts. You know, like chronic ulcerative colitis is when your body attacks itself. Right. So I've often thought, like, how sad it is that I was in such pain as a child that I ate myself alive.
It's terrible, right?
I mean, I don't know. I think about that. Anyway.
All right.
I have a question, but
okay, but you have to.
Mic is the problem.
Yeah, go for it.
Here's the mic.
Just while we're on chronic illness stuff, and we talked. You and I had a whole conversation about this last time. We went out to dinner and like talked about things that you probably shouldn't talk about while eating dinner.
I loved it.
But yeah, you were mentioning how it's not a crisis, like talking to another person, if they had a bad day. Yeah. I find myself a lot of the time when other people, even people I do care a lot about, complaining about, oh, I don't feel well, oh, I have a cold, like things that are health-wise not great, but minimal. And I always find myself like in this place of resentment because, okay, yeah, you can deal with that. It's not like a big deal. And I wonder if you having not similar issues, but still drastic issues, like myself, have that feeling of resentment when other people are complaining about fixable whatever kind of problems.
That's a good question, and I'm glad you asked it because I want to be clear that, like, I mean, I do have compassion. I get it. I totally get it. Because you're like, you don't even know what it's like to be sick, because I had all these things in the hospital all the time. But what I mean more than that, because it's sure you can be like, oh my God, stop being such a whiner. You know, you've got allergies or something. But what I mean even more than that is like with the get over it stuff. What it's like to be in a hospital for days and days and days, and then to get out and then have to go back. Yeah. To go back. It's like, what I mean by that is like your little kerfuffle with that girl at work that you don't like.
It's nothing.
Enough.
Right.
Stop it. Stop it. Don't do that with your time, because it's not that like you don't know pain, because everything's relative, but there's no time. There's no time for this. Right. You must go. Right. You must go. I can't waste my time with you and with a boyfriend or something. It's like you have to go.
It's a waste
because
of time.
It's a waste of time.
No, I get it. I do. I mean, it's really interesting. There's
that's a good question.
We had a lot of problems having a kid, and we lost one at 22 weeks, and it was really, really devastating. Then we had our kid, and she's insanely great. Yay. But there was something like physically changed. Mm-hmm. Like I was a different person. Like I just didn't cry as much. And things didn't get to me as much. There was a strength. There was a like. I don't know. It's just like when you are at a place where like they're like, well, it's the life of the mother, or the life of the child. Like that kind of moment of like, I don't know if I'm going to survive this, and that's happened a number of times in my life, you know. But it changes you. Like do you feel like it, like physically, like I'm not the same person, which I think is really interesting, and sort of leads to all the other weird things we do in our life and where we choose to spend our time.
Absolutely.
Which gets us back to quilting.
Right.
It all leads back to quilting.
And do you feel like you were ill and then started quilting?
Kind of. It's all kind of a mishmash, but it was around 08.
It's around that time.
This month, 10 years ago, was when I got my diagnosis.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the quilting world and what I've learned and what you think about it, and then I'm bringing Ron in as a cultural economist as well. First of all, 2008 seems to be a really important year for quilting. And I've told you this, and I keep saying this over and over again, but it's super weird. We get you, 2006, 2007, 2008. Yeah. We get you. We get Scott Fortunoff, who like leaves the Wall Street and starts in his family business, who now is like doing he's doing ridiculous things.
That year,
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's weird.
We get Tula Pink. We get Jenny Doan. Yeah. We get Alex Anderson starting her internet stuff at that time. Yeah. Like when you think about just that group.
The Modern Quilt Guild.
The Modern Quilt Guild.
08.
Right. 08.
You know my theory, right?
What?
I have a whole theory that era of time, the 2007, all that kind of years close to that in the future, that it'll be a moment in history that people are studying as an artistic revolution, because so many different things were happening at that point. Even in quilting, you can see it, which isn't always something that people like think about. But you can see it in music and in art and in animation. This is a moment where things are changing, and I really think it's going to be something that's like actually going to be studied and researched.
Like the Virginia Woolf. What is the Virginia Woolf thing?
Yeah, I love that, and thank you, because that is a great thought. What was happening in art and music and all of that stuff. Yes, Sidne. You can always learn from everyone, totally. Because you're right. I need to look at it. Fabulous.
Ron, why is that time period? Why are things changing in the 2007, 2008 period of time?
Well, one thing that strikes me is it's the social media revolution too. That it's really that moment where Web 2.0 comes in about 2002, 2003, and it takes a couple of years for that to sort of develop ahead of steam, if you will. So really 2007, 2008 is we've had social media platforms. MySpace preceded Facebook, but really all of those things get going right at that time. And it's access. It is the ability of people to sort of, for the first time, network and connect and present voice in a way that they aren't really receivers as much, or they aren't solely receivers. They're also producers of voice. And so you just get, there's all this kind of through the 90s, the kind of bubbling up of all this activity that's all sort of recognizing internet culture and recognizing web pages and all this stuff, but you don't have the connectivity until about that time. And so
How much
that's
do
what
you
I
think
think of.
social media played in your career and what you're doing?
Well, the blog the blog, man. I was like, I can write and have it, posted to the internet. And the thing is, social media, I hate it. I'm canceling Facebook, all of it. I can't stand it anymore. But that's very interesting. That's true. Because a blog is different from social media. Twitter, 140 characters, not for a writer. No. Maybe a comedy writer, because brevity is the soul of wit. But anyway, but what you're saying is very interesting. And I think also, too, when I think about 2008, of course, I think about the election of Barack Obama, too. Not that was a cause, but that's also a moment. Yeah. It's like, well, what the heck was in the water in 2008? What was going on, So, yeah.
Well, and I'm sure you're pointing to the fact that even in getting elected, that his is the first campaign known for using all of that kind of digital foundation to promote his campaign and move it forward.
Right.
So interesting. All right, so we're going to go back just a little bit, if that's cool. So we're going to go back to the origin point to me seems to be
1970.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So it seems like that's the origin point. So tell us in terms of your history. You're thinking about history right now. I want to sort of understand what you see as quilt history, because I see like this epoch is, or whatever we are in right now, starts there, and now we're in reaction to it. But you're doing a bigger project that looks at history, and then I'm curious, like, as you talk, then to have Ron kind of respond to what you're seeing. How are you thinking about quilting history right now?
Well, let me make this like totally brief, because I could go on. My goal,
like 12, like you have like hundreds of hours.
Oh my God,
I know. I'm like, what's quilt history?
I know, exactly.
5 words.
I'll tell you what it isn't going to be.
What?
It's not going to be the standard narrative that we've heard.
That's really good.
Because everything we know about quilts, and like the romance of the quilt in America, this has got to go.
Yeah.
Okay. There were no quilts. The Underground Railroad thing didn't happen. Okay. There were people who were making quilts who hated it. Quilting. They hated it. There were feminists, so-called second-wave feminists. There's a lot to say about that. But the Whitney exhibit in 1971, that was this watershed event, this was a deal with the devil. The only way quilts were able to be good enough to be in the walls of a major American museum in New York City was to be stripped entirely of their quiltness. Their materiality, gone, blasted away. They had to be paintings. They had to be seen as abstract paintings for them to be good enough to be in these museums. There was a very, very fearsome backlash that is never talked about, because people don't talk about politics sometimes with their quilting. But the Whitney exhibit, I talked about it for years as being this really important thing. Not unequivocally good, no. I mean, there are problems with it. So the African American quilt, just as a concept, this is really problematic. The only story of African Americans in the great grand legacy of American quilting, they are othered within an inch of their life into the Gee's Bend thing. And the Gee's Bend quilters, I mean, it's so complicated. There's a wonderful essay now, Amelia Peck, for the Metropolitan Museum, a wonderful essay. I was just reading it on the plane. But so much of what we think we know about quilting is watered down, has been passed along. People like to think of quilting as just this toothless, like, symbol of rural living. And it's just this, but the quilt is stronger than that. And when you dig deep down into the history, the humanity of all of us is restored. Because the more you look, the more you see, oh my God, this is philosophy of art. I mean, really, and I know I'm like into my topic, but whether or not a quilt is art or craft is one of the deepest questions I could possibly ask any kind of art historian or artist or person. Why do we think art and craft are separate? The quilt is part of why we think it is separate. Why do we think it's that way? Why do we think of a quilt more as craft than art? What is art? I mean, what is art is actually a very short distance from the quilt. I mean, it's all there.
It's so interesting, right? And it's so amazing. Yeah. And when I was in grad school, we were still talking about high art and low art, right? Right? Because I was a mod, right?
Hold me back, Sidne.
Because I was a European historian with older faculty, and so I mean, it'll be really interesting to see what you uncover.
Yeah.
So, what is quilting? What is quilting? What is quilting? And how because I see it like
Ron?
Yeah, what is quilting? I mean, I think
first.
like what is quilting? Do you see it shifting what it means to be quilting throughout the history of it, or do you think there's core principles that kind of, is that why? So what I'm seeing, let me see, tell you what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a ton of consumerism, a ton of shops, a ton of what Ron was talking about. Like, I don't interview anyone almost any time. They all have their own blogs. Yeah. Like, regular quilters are like posting stuff. Like, they're not just, like, it's very interesting. Everybody is like, there are all these quilt entrepreneurs, mini micro entrepreneurs, or they want to be in that. There's those that are like professionals, but they're upset because there's not, like whether it's professional or not is a huge question.
Yeah.
And then all of this charity quilting, which I know your mom is really big in Quilts of Valor, right? And that's huge too. Like, it's like these, like, we're talking about posh sweatshops, like us, like why are we like? And then you talk to people, we see them, and it's really important, and like this hand making thing. So it's like, that's what I'm seeing. Like the landscape is all of this stuff, and then the big companies and like the big personalities and the big star people. But it's weird. So is this the way quilting has always been, or is it like in this weird state right now?
It's in a weird state. And I think, the commercialization part of it is happening to so many things. It's happening to quilting and has been happening. And I will say that, like, when I said it was in decline, I mean the system, the way it is now, the way the businesses operate, the kit quilts, the fast quilts, the publishing is crumbling. So quilting is not in decline, but we have gone through a fallow period in this country. There was a time when quilts fell out of fashion. After the Great Depression in the 1930s, many people quilted, but in the 40s, women went to work. It was the war. They were doing victory gardens. They were doing different things. People weren't quilting. And in the 50s, with all the better living through chemistry, the kind of Hoover vacuums and all these things, polyester sheets that you didn't have to iron, quilts were very out of fashion. They were seen as old-fashioned. And it wasn't until in the 60s, no, not so much. The late 60s and the 70s, that's when the revival happened. So that can happen again. And it may very well happen again. If all the guilds are online, I don't know, man. Like, is that going to work? I don't know. You have to get together to quilt with people if you get together with people to quilt, unless you do a Facebook Live and you're not there. I mean, I don't know. It's happened before. It can happen again. And I don't think if we keep trying to do it the way we're doing it with these terrible magazines that are all just ads and patterns to sell the latest fabric line, it's going to go into decline. So I think Quiltfolk and this documentary I'm working on, this is to put context back into all the context that's been stripped for the profit motive, basically. History doesn't sell things usually. What do you think?
What do you point to when you talk about that revival in the late 60s, the sort of rise of it again? Are there specific things you attribute that to?
Yes, it was the Whitney exhibit, but it was also the bicentennial.
Right, bicentennial.
Quilts were in the popular culture. Quilts were outside of the bubble that we are in now. People who are not into quilting they don't care about me. They don't. So it was, but the bicentennial was, which is great because I've been recognized at airports.
That doesn't know of quilting.
Oh yes, I mean, people. I'll tell some guy on a plane, I'm in the quilt industry. There's an industry. How much do you sell your quilts for? Wow. I'm like, oh my god. So, but it's the bicentennial, Ron, because the 1976, everybody was into it, and
it's like a thing. Like everybody, like it becomes.
They wanted
thing,
to make a quilt to celebrate the thing.
It's olden times. Let's make a quilt, and then it became like a thing.
So it's a perception of its historical positioning. Like they see it as something that, in the effort of celebrating this historic moment, casts back and somehow represents the very thing they're celebrating.
Exactly.
And it just happens to have this kind of coalescence of these elements.
Exactly.
And that fuels it at that moment.
Yep, exactly. Roots, Alex Haley's Roots was, 21 million people tuned in to watch that show. It was on network TV. So there was the Back to the Land movement. People were growing their own, corn in their yard. I don't know, having chicken. My mother and my father had a chicken or a pig or something. So there was all this cultural stuff. It was after the Vietnam War, right after Vietnam, 76. Yeah. So it was, the country was in this change, and quilts were seen as symbols of American unity. They were seen as, they're comfort. They comfort. They're these functional art pieces that we have a heritage with. So people started to make them, and People who had never been interested in quilts went up to the attic and down to the basement to find the family quilts. That's when the collectors started. Tens of thousands of dollars. Ralph Lauren is buying quilts in New York City. That's when the G's Ben thing started, was in the 60s. It wasn't in 2000. It was with the Freedom Quilting Bee. Diana Vreeland, editor of Vogue magazine, was buying quilts. It became cool. And it's never really stopped being cool to fashion people in many ways. Dior has got quilts on the runway this season.
So interesting.
Was in this resurgence of revival. Thank you. Yeah. And this revival of quilting, and then more into modern era.
Yeah.
Do you find that the people who are doing these things and in the quilt industry are still aware and still conscious of the history behind it? At least somewhat? Like, they know it's historical. That they might be misguided. Because in the stuff that I look at, comic books and cartoons, and people are always like, oh, that's just a modern thing, but it's not. It's rooted in political cartoons and newspapers and things. And so I'm wondering, with something like quilting, that like the mass population is like, oh, that's like a thing that grandmas do, how people in the industry see it in terms of its history.
This is one smart kid. That's the thing. That's the problem, Sidne, is that because, and this is the business part of it, the magazines, and like we've said it, magazines are so important. Print shapes a culture. So these magazines used to do history stuff. Before the internet, they had advertisers. They had so many advertisers, and so they had pages. They had many pages with which to play. And so they did interviews with quilters, and they talked about history, and they ran antique quilts just for fun, and they did tours of antique quilt shops in Pennsylvania and all these different things. But with the advent of the internet, the magazines, of course, print took a beating, we all know that, but they had to strip away all of that history stuff, Sidne. And so to make room for more ads and to make the advertisers happy, they had to run more quilts because quilts sell fabric. And so that history, we have lost so much of it. There are modern quilters who have no idea how good it really is, babe. Like, you don't even know like how great this is. You like to make a quilt, and that's enough. But the more we teach people, the more we show them, not the romance of the patchwork quilt, but the truth of this object being the history of America, the more it'll be healthy growth, because people will never give it up. Every innovation, every dye innovation, aniline dyes, they show up in the quilts. The truth of slavery and child labor, this is in our quilts. One of the main reasons that the explosion of quilts in the 19th century happened was because slaves were picking cotton, and they shipped the cotton up north, and the children were producing the cloth for nothing. So fabric, which used to be $5 a yard imported from England, within the span of like a few years was 5 cents a yard, because we were producing it ourselves. This is a fact. It is not... it's a fact.
Which stage, which historical moment?
Industrial Revolution.
Like, we're talking end of the 19th century.
We're talking. With the production of cloth in like Lowell, Massachusetts, it's early 19th century.
Like you're looking at water power, steam power driven mills. That production of interesting.
So when,
I didn't know it was that early. So we're pre-Civil War. You're talking about.
Totally. And Civil War, like there were so many great quilts made, and like 1880 was sort of a golden age. But when you look at the quilt block and how much innovation was happening, and how people were sharing blocks like across the country, the railroads were happening, so people were traveling. People were going west in covered wagons and taking quilt blocks with them and quilts with them, and teaching people when they got there, sending things home. But these, the industrialization, it has everything to do with how many quilts we have and how we got to play around. We had fabric to spare. We had so much fabric we didn't know what to do with it. So we invented things. But it's, slavery and child labor. It's part of the quilt story. And so the more people know about that history, it's not that it's a bummer. It's that it gets deeper, and the truth of the quilt is more wonderful than the myth. Yeah. And it's a democratic art. Everyone makes quilts, rich, poor, every color. Everyone makes them.
Right.
We all make them, and we've made them a long time.
Now, what about the other thing that? Do you have a comment about that?
No. Go right ahead.
It's interesting, right?
It's very interesting.
It connects to all the stuff you do. Right. So he teaches internet studies, but they start When he starts his class, they start at like Lowell and
Really?
maybe even earlier.
Yeah, we do millwork first.
Cool.
So that they understand basis of
They're
economy.
like freshmen.
Well, they understand that.
They think they're
put
going to
it-
go study
Well,
Facebook.
to put in,
and
I think really to
so
understand contemporary times, you need to understand that it's the foundations of technology that give rise to a particular way of economy, and that's easier for them to understand when they look at Industrial Revolution. That they look at, again, water power, steam power, but then electricity in full revolution. And there's so many things that happened in regard to electricity coming in and fully cementing that as a way of life, as the basis of economy, that helps us understand what we've gone through with digital technology.
Right. Yeah, great.
So like that's why we start there, is just
great.
because it's so reflective and so parallel.
Yes, the world was completely turned upside down.
Right.
I mean, by the internet, exactly, and the steam engine. I mean, absolutely. You couldn't. I mean, you used to have to get, English cloth was imported. Chintz was made in India, sent to England, sent to here. I mean, even the wealthiest, whitest ladies could only afford, a little bit. Suddenly, you can buy a bolt, what we would consider a bolt of calico, at the dry goods store for a few dollars. I mean. And this idea that people scraped their fabric together to make a quilt. No. Women, journals that exist when people talked about quilting, which they didn't do a ton because it was just, you just did it. You wouldn't talk about, going to Walmart, But no, they bought fabric for their quilts. Mama bought a length of calico today for her quilt. It was not subsistence. It was abundance. Abundance is the reason we have these quilts. You can't make a scrap quilt unless you have a ton of fucking fabric left over. Hello? This idea that it's this, but it's this myth, this Horatio Alger, weird American ingenuity, we just did it all by the skin of our teeth. That there is some of that. But it's more about industrialization and the market. And that's why this is what you're doing.
Production of goods. It just becomes mass. Exactly. Mass production of everything is the story, right? So this is one more.
And is that why we get the
20s,
when you're talking about the revival in the 20s, that the industrialization and sort of all of the magazines and sort of where you are in the sort of technology, I would imagine, is encouraging that revolution.
Yes. And it's this return to a simpler time, right? This whole, anytime there's a revival of anything, it's the good old days. Yeah, the good old days usually sucked, that's kind of it was not good, before. But yeah, this return to a simpler time. That's what it's like. Yeah.
Interesting.
Sorry about the mic situation. It's a little off topic, but it just kind of fits in. So you can cut this out if you decide to.
Because I often cut things.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't ever. I'm always we'll just cut this out. Never
I want to keep that I said fuck.
That's good. We'll put explicit and then we'll get more people listening.
Yes, mary-fons.
So, where does, I don't know if there's truth to it or if it's just mythos, but it's stuff that we're taught even in elementary school. The whole idea that during the Underground Railroad stuff, the quilts that were put out with the different meanings, the different blocks, where does that come from? Because it always seemed too fantastical.
Well, I'm so glad. This is so important. It's so important. Okay, so there was a book called Hidden in Plain View that came out some years ago, I think the 90s, and it was a story. It was a novel, okay? And in this novel, the writer... that was the story, that in the Underground Railroad during that time in America, there were people who put quilt blocks in the windows of their home and on the clothesline and things. And these blocks was secret coding that told people where to go, that it was a safe place, or that the bear track block meant turn left at the thing, And there is so people love this story because it's wow, that's awesome. That's a great, it's a great idea. It's such a great idea.
Right.
But so people took this story and they were like, oh, what is this based on? It's based in, where did you do your research or whatnot? And it was very murky. It's not based on any evidence at all. It was a really good idea and a really good story. But the author didn't really fight that idea that it wasn't really true because book sales were very good. I don't want to, speak ill, whatever. But it got out of hand. And there's no evidence that ever happened. Not a shred of evidence.
Now,
and
here's the interesting part about it is that, because I've interviewed a bunch of people, and
it always comes up.
It always comes up. It's very heated. And those that believe that it was true, like one of the women here in town, Celie, they're very, very upset that people want to dismiss it. So it's and then other people who are like, it is not true. You know, it's become like a racial divide of like you're trying to erase our history.
Yes.
But there's no history. I mean, but there's I don't get that.
The thing
What's
is, there's two very, 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 very important things to say about it. One is that the truth is better. And the truth is, this is what I mean by dismantling the romance of these things. The truth of quilts at the time of slavery is sadder and richer and more interesting and more in need of more investigation than this folk tale, which is now it's a folk tale. And folk tales, so that's the other point, but women in the North, many of them made abolitionist quilts, and they are remarkable. They have poems on them. They have drawings on them. They're great. Okay. The other thing to think about when you think about quilts and slavery is that many of the quilts that came out of the houses of the plantations were made by enslaved people.
And we hear that as well.
And
as well. Of like,
this need,
and that like there's Seeley, the same woman, was like, well, you know, they'll say like, well, you know, slaves couldn't make points. And it's like we were making all.
Oh dear God!
Right, like we could.
Who says that?
Well, there's this notion of like, well, slaves couldn't. It had to be the white women because slaves didn't know how to actually sew.
That is so offensive.
And Seeley, who's African American, is so offended by all of this
that's disgusting.
It's all of this notion. Well, I think it also relates to sort of what happens now when you look at like Craftsy and other spaces where it is predominantly people who look like us, right? People in like 35 to 80, white women, college educated, that we're not an inclusive, the industry is not inclusive.
True.
And so there's a marginalization that's still occurring in this crazy way.
Yeah.
At least that's what I've sort of experienced in the last year.
That's true, and that's the whole. I mean, I could talk about that too. I will say one thing about the Underground Railroad stuff is that, you know, that's enslaved people could not quilt. I mean, I just read you were bought at a higher price. Okay, if you could sew, so that's like it's
right.
Okay, so like no, some of these fine quilts. I mean, it's just
and
awful.
You think about like in New Orleans, and our African American community was basically doing all of the sewing in this most amazing way for all of these very fancy houses through the 40s and 50s. Right? We still have that kind of tradition.
Yes,
here.
So the Underground Railroad thing is it's a hot issue because it's a nice story, and we want to feel good about slavery. Because it was just that bad. It's a nice story, but it's not fair. Because if it's not true, so if that's the story we have in our pocket about quilts and slavery, then that's a good one. That's nice. You know, quilts help people escape. But there's so much more to it than that. And so it's a superficial dialogue. It's a superficial conversation. I want to do justice. I want to do more investigation. I want people to understand the role that textiles played in that time, and not just tell this Underground Railroad thing. The other thing, just to say the other point, is that it is folklore at this point. Laurel Horton, who is a quilt scholar, helped me a great deal with this whole problem, because people hate it when you say, you know, it's not, there's no evidence. Could be true, no evidence. Right. She said, folk tales represent what the values are of a culture. So Paul Bunyan, you know, John Henry, these sort of tall tales or these folk tales, these things we tell each other, they reflect the values that we have or that we want. Yeah. So it's good that this is a folk tale now that they say, and you know, Underground Railroad, there were quilts that helped people to freedom. We can tell it, it's okay, but it's not necessarily true. So we can have that story. But don't stop looking for the other stories that do not get near amount as much press time. So that's my position on it. Well, and Questa Benberry got in big trouble for just sort of lending her support to that without really having the evidence. And she was one of the most important quilt scholars ever. And she was an African-American woman. So anyway.
Do you feel like Quiltfolk is helping to tell stories that are beyond the...
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because we go and talk to people. And it's front of mind for me to be inclusive in this magazine, to get those to get those quilters who otherwise are not in the industry or whatever in front of people's faces.
Why do you think the industry has stayed so not diverse? Like, I'm sort of surprised. And, RFL got in trouble for that when they did their ambassadors recently, where it was pretty much. Do you remember?
Yeah,
that?
I heard about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's consistent across. I mean, it isn't any one. Yeah. What's that about? Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I want to drink this water, but I also actually, what do you, I mean, Ron, do you have a thought about that too? I'm not trying to punt, but I mean, I really, why does an industry?
Okay, so all kinds of people quilt, but the industry itself is focused on, I think, for economic reasons, they believe a very kind of white middle class women that they don't see. Even the modern quilters are like kind of, they were on like modern quilters, meaning they're like more, the colors are a bit different, but they're a little bit younger, but they're still mostly like catering to white women, and there's not a lot of gender diversity. There's not a lot of color. There's not a lot of men. There's some famous men, but it really caters to, like, they think we're the buying public, and so
we are. I mean, predominantly, it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. And I've got. Yeah. Please go ahead.
And then also, how has diversity in quilting looked at historically as well? Because oftentimes, like within the movements, like the 70s movement, were like, what were the different, I don't want to say categories, but what were the different, who was a part of that? What would the color diversity, gender diversity, where is all of that? Because there are movements that are very diverse things, like the AIDS quilt stuff, which I can never remember the actual name of. Like, there's some movements that are like, oh, that's a diverse quilting thing.
Yeah.
But more generally and more historically, how does diversity look to both of you?
I can't wait to answer that.
It's just economics, that they see that as the buying power, and so that's just what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know better than I, but it sounds to me, I mean, when you talk about it as an industry and sort of off of this revival, has really been a basis for the growth of this as an industry taking off. And from the way you've talked about it, the kind of overlay of a particular age demographic, gender demographic, racial demographic, it sounds to me that that's an industry kind of development, that they've seen, here is the biggest section of our buying public, and so a lot of the activity, at least the most visible activity, where you have shops and you have product, and you have, these are often the most visible elements, because they're sort of in the market and distributed, and they're all around us, as opposed to things that happen in more niche quarters, where you have to go to those places to see what's happening there.
Right.
So it sounds to me like that there's this intersection of kind of visibility in what you're talking about.
And it could be like who began it too, right? It was women. It was
Say it again.
It was middle class women who were beginning the movement in the 70s, and that's how it grew up.
Which movement? What did you say?
In the 70s. It's
okay. Oh,
right.
Of
you know what I mean? Like of quilting, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I mean, I don't know, but it's interesting. I wonder if we're going to get to a point where, like, these other groups will, like, it seems like they want voices. They want designers. They want scissors that are for men too, or for, you know what I mean, like there's like this kind of interesting
what are scissors for men too?
Well, they talk about, like, we don't want pink scissors, like we have
Really?
other colors.
Oh
Can we have scissors that are not
It's
just
just
pink,
weird. It's
right?
just weird. So the
I don't know.
I think
weird,
it's
though.
this, like,
it's there.
Eating its tail thing in terms of the over commercialization of it, and
Yeah.
I mean, like, you go capitalism. Like, I'm not I'm not some commie.
Yeah.
But it's a very expensive thing. If you do it with all the toys, making quilts is extremely expensive. I mean, the machines cost more and more.
Do we think that's true historically? Is that now, or has that always been?
It's now, like, it's on steroids now.
It is
like
on
so
steroids.
much of everything, right? Politics, everything's
Right.
on steroids. But a sewing machine was pretty much ubiquitous in most homes, even if it was in like 1860s, the second half of the 19th century. Sewing machines were like, you had one, you know, and it
they
was.
were one of the first companies that worked out installment payment.
I know.
You know
It's
that?
so great.
I'm sure you
Yes,
do.
yes.
Since you bring it up, it's just
It's
a point,
so great.
a moment to make
They
the point.
had little banks,
that
and you could put.
they were really innovative about getting them into the marketplace to make them available to everyone.
Yes,
They're an
precisely.
interesting predecessor to, like, Henry Ford and driving down the cost of the automobile.
Exactly.
But it's this idea of that machine is something that needs to be in everyone's home, and they got really good about being able to to pay on credit effectively.
Amazing, right? See, this is what I mean. It's the history of America, the quilt.
Yeah.
And that that idea of paying in installments. Everybody wanted a sewing machine so much. Any quilter today who's like, you can't do it that way, that's cheating, or like, oh, you didn't do it by hand. It's like, these women, to get a sewing machine, they would have murdered their grandmother to do it, to get the sewing machine.
Right.
There was people who said, I'm no longer slave to the needle. I have something I can do besides sew with my needle and thread in my lap. I mean, it was so great. But the white women, the upper middle class white woman, it is the buying power, because she has the time, the space, the whatever to do it. Like if you look at the demographic, it is the hobbyist. But it's also because the modeling, there's not as much modeling as there should be. These different diverse faces are not in the magazines as much. They're not in this.
They're not.
But everyone's quilting. Everyone always has. So it is our duty, I think, certainly as an editor of a magazine, to put that front of mind. Because, once again, it's richer when you dig. It's not about shaming people. It's not about making people feel bad. I want Linda in Omaha to have fun, this white lady with her grandchildren in her charity quilts. I love Linda.
Right.
But there's more to it. And when you find the more to it, it gets better.
It gets better.
Mm-hmm.
It gets better.
It gets better.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. All right, we've talked a long time.
I know. I don't even know how long.
No, we're good. We're
an
hour.
So
we're
excited.
good. We're not terrible. We're not terrible.
Okay.
Yeah. So
the long ones, and
they
like
good. Okay.
they love you.
Yay!
They totally love you. All right, I have to sort of see all my notes.
Well, an interesting question I would have, and I don't want to lengthen this anymore, but
You're like, please let me go.
but it comes to mind when you talk about all of these things. So a lot of these develop because you're really embedding a lot of the recognition in the material conditions of a given moment, right? So much of what you're talking about is sort of what happens at a given moment because of what's available and how that plays into the marketplace, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of this is discussion of industrialization and mass production and materialization of stuff, a lot of physical stuff suddenly available in a lot of ways. And then obviously a key component of contemporary economy, of moving into a lot of the digital stuff we're talking about, is this dematerialization of all of the processes. So an interesting thought would be how, in terms of quilting, when you talk about what you're talking about of what's happening as a result of a lot of social media, but kind of broader. I don't just mean Facebook and Instagram. I mean kind of how all of this now, it is playing out over digital spaces. So when you talk about magazines and the print
Guilds
about it, the
and
journalism about everything, sort of the way in which you get sort of intersecting and sometimes contrasting forces of the materialization that's produced so much of the status of what quilting is, and then contemporary kind of dematerialization as we're moving into all these digital spaces with it. And I don't know where that goes, but it makes me curious.
Same.
When you look at the concerns about quilting, what's being lost in certain ways because of these technologies and the way things are transacting more and more, sort of how the forces of dematerialization are moving in and affecting the history of materialization of a lot of this.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think as long as we're made of flesh and blood, we will need quilts. As long as there are babies, there will be a need for baby quilts because we're still flesh and blood. But I think when I say post-revival, when we're in a decline, I think we will see it bottom out before people do another revival, that they want to go back to the good old days that we're in the twilight of, right? Because dematerialization and digitization and all of this stuff online, there will be a desperate need in a few decades to make quilts again. But I do think it's ending. Whatever period we have been in is it's over, because it has to reset. It has to reset. This is the way people are. This is what I mean by quilts leading us into philosophy and economics. It's the thing that quilts have given me is an angle. I have an angle. I think I said it before, but I have an angle. But what you're saying is absolutely true. Are there going to be digital quilts? I don't know. Sure, yes, yes, there will be, but they won't keep us warm. Maybe they will. I don't know.
Well, and it's such an interesting, like, in this hyper capitalist producing, buying space, and all the tools and all the, like, the rulers and, like, like there's just so much right now, right? Because of technology, the 3D printing and just everything. People still want to make quilts and give them away to people, and then that's what I always like. I love the famous. I love you being here.
I love being here.
But I also
I'm coming back here in like
the regular
2 months.
people, and that's I imagine you feel that way with Quiltfolk too, right?
Yeah.
That like, why do you make those quilts? And they're like, well, when we give them to the kids, and then like when I give them out as for kids, and then when I adopted a kid, she came with a Linus blanket, and it's like, oh my gosh,
Wow.
or like well, the fire people have them on their trucks, so when like there's a tragedy, they can wrap a kid in it, like.
It's our humanity.
Something, like in the like they're not like, oh well, we're just gonna go buy a bunch. Now I'm not anti-consumer quilts. Like I buy every kind of quilt, right?
Sure.
But there's an authentic humanness. What you're talking about in this hyper-capitalist space where we're buying gazillion bolts of fabric, all this fabric, we're still making them to give to our families and to give to strangers, and we're spending hundreds of hours doing this, and that to me is such an amazing thing.
It's beautiful. It's like
Right.
I mean, it's a beautiful. I think that people get really scared when you say over commercialization, capitalization, blah, blah, but it's just look around your studio,
Right.
ladies. You have too much. You have too much stuff.
We tried to do a giveaway
Most
on
people, not everybody. I'm going to get in trouble now for saying that.
No, and it's not true. I mean, but there's a lot of buying, and when we did a giveaway as an experiment, they're like, we don't need anything. I mean, they like free stuff, right? They do like free stuff. Don't get me wrong. And free stuff is great.
Yeah.
Everybody likes free stuff. But there wasn't a sense of like, we're not here because of the giveaway.
Right.
Which I thought was really interesting. Like, that's not why we're here.
Right.
That's not why we want to talk about stuff.
I think it's, making a quilt, any quilt making, it's a democratic art. Anybody can do it. So it's like, will we need art in the digital realm? Yes. And so maybe we will still make quilts because of that. Because it's art anybody can make. And it is art. Not all quilts are art, but the quilt is art.
I think all quilts are art. I don't have any... and I also think
all writing is writing. Like you...
Spoken like a real writer. Wow.
Right.
Wow.
You think everything... Like,
no, not that you're not.
Yeah,
I
you know
understand.
what?
Yeah.
You really don't see... I'm trying to talk very
Oh,
loud.
yes.
We need more mics. That's the summary of today. I mean, you see art as art regardless of what it is. Like,
Which is great.
Which is... I'm not saying that is a bad thing.
Yeah, there's no judge. I don't judge.
Judgment.
That's true. I don't have any
Things
judgment
or stuff
on
you
so
don't
many
vibe
levels.
with.
No, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. I don't. I feel like, and we get this
great.
always of like professional versus hobbyist, and I don't really. I mean, I see that there is a distinction, but it's ephemeral.
Yes,
it is
I
not.
agree with you. Yes.
And I see the days when when I quilt because I'm just going to make something for our back room.
Right.
It is different than when I'm sort of like,
Yes.
I'm going to have to do this to talk with somebody, so I have to, like it's different. It's a mindset, I guess.
Which to me is another angle on a lot of what's already been said, which is the idea of who gets to decide and for whom is it art, and I think fundamentally what's at stake.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to what's at stake. Right, that when you're getting to, because there's the doing of it, the making of quilts, and people, there's all sorts of doing it, and whatever pleasure comes from the simple tactile, the doing of it, and then there's the meaning of it, and they're so intertwined that meaning making out of it is an incredibly kind of personal process.
Yes.
And that's where I connect with you when you say, sort of, I'm not going to be judgmental, or who am I to judge? Who is to say where one finds meaning out of the activities that they do?
Right, and that's the economics part of it, because a quilt didn't used to be considered art or craft. It was a quilt. It existed outside of the value system. We're getting to like Marx now. It existed. It had a quilt value, if you will. It was totally loved. It was seen as wonderful, but it wasn't in the market. They didn't sell. Now some people would sell them.
Gift economy kind of thing.
Yes,
yeah.
I've been reading about that. I mean, the moment an art gallery puts a quilt on the wall, now we have a problem because a problem. But it's like, now that this, you can't put a price on a quilt because it is a price. This is what I've been writing about. It is a priceless, worthless object. You can't put a price on a quilt because it's very complicated. Who made it? Where did they make it? Is it like aesthetically pleasing? Whatever. It's priceless because it is slippery. The quilt is beautiful. It's slippery. It shape shifts. It's worthless as soon as the people who imbue it with meaning are dead. A couple generations you've got before nobody cares. And they're textiles, so they rot. Some may burn. They will all rot away in time. The quilt is a tricky object. It's a priceless, worthless object.
Do you think it's
this
important
is part of the introduction to my documentary series?
I love it. I totally love it. Okay, so I totally beyond love all of that.
Good.
I just can't.
I'll give you the piece of writing that
I would love it.
It's fairly. I will say it is fairly powerful.
I like it.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I worked really hard on it. I'm gonna own that.
Barbara Brackman. What role does Barbara Brackman play in this whole thing? I think
goddess.
She is. So Barbara Brackman is a teacher. She's going around to these little towns in like.
She's
late
living
60s,
now. She's
early
living
70s,
now. Mm-hmm.
Late 60s, early 70s, because she finishes by 74. And she's got a lot of extra time. So she goes to these libraries and she puts on index cards. Like she looks through these different farmer magazines and she makes the blocks. And so she's drawing the blocks and she's collecting from all these little magazines all over the Midwest. Cataloging it because she's like Danny, our friend. She just likes doing it. It's fun.
Yeah.
Like that's why she's doing it. And then it turns into a book. And then it turns into a database. But because of her, I see her as such a linchpin to what we see as she gives us the vocabulary, like that she gives us our modern vocabulary. I mean, there could have been lots, and then you can.
The encyclopedia of pieced quilt patterns, all of the blocks cataloged.
They have
quilt
Brackman
museums
numbers,
use the Brackman
right?
numbers to
Right.
identify quilt.
Yeah, and she's doing this before the internet, and she doesn't ever do it after that. Like she's done in 74, right?
Well,
With
that part.
With
yeah.
that part.
But
She does
wasn't the
applique
only,
and she does others. And she isn't the only one.
Right. The Round Robin group was doing it. It was like it was talked
Like
about
a thing.
Edison and Westinghouse, like the race to who was going to catalog all the quilt blocks first. Fascinating. It's like Adventure on the High
bizarre,
Seas.
right?
Oh, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and so that this becomes like our public domain. Now, it's not a public domain in the sense of the way I think of a public domain because they haven't checked to see if it's out of copyright or not. And they still may be under copyright. But we see this as our pool of resources that we use. And I'm sure that happens a lot earlier as well. But that for the modern period, there's a coalescing of this like cataloging. And now we have everybody, I mean, it's bizarre. It's really interesting.
It's bizarre and interesting.
I don't have anything else to say. Okay, 2 more questions and we're done. Promise. One is money.
I like it, but I don't know how other people. I mean, I'm.
Well, they really loved the last one, which was 2.5 hours long.
Good
just
God.
so you know.
Who did you interview?
You.
Me and Tula were 2.5. Oh wow! It's like who was the jerk who stayed on for 2.5 hours? Yes,
you guys were 2.5 hours, and everybody like totally.
Really? Okay, good.
Yes,
like
I love the long ones because then
Yeah.
if you like it, you just want to listen to it all the time.
All right, so where's the money in quilting right now? Who's like everybody I talk to is like, I don't make very much money. There's not a lot of money in this.
The owners,
the owners of like
sewing
the big
machine
companies,
the fabric companies, the media companies.
The top.
I mean,
no,
I
right?
don't know,
Not
man.
the media
The
companies,
media,
not the pattern makers, right?
No.
I mean, a few, 1 or 2.
No. A few superstar fabric designers like Tula, but I mean, it's hard. It's hard out here. It's a hustle.
It's a lot.
It's been a hustle for me. I mean,
Right.
I was not. I have been
It shouldn't be,
my own woman
right?
for a long time. No, yeah, it's hard. I mean, the fabric,
weird, right?
line and the book and everything. It doesn't. This is the model that just it cannot work anymore. It doesn't work for people. It's not.
The
enough
shops
to live
aren't
on.
making money.
I don't know.
No,
I don't
they're
know
not.
about- no.
A lot of them aren't, right? A lot of them never even take a salary. They barely survive. Like, and we have these little shops all over the place. These independent shops that come and go. It's very weird,
That's
right?
true.
There's so much money in this, and yet is it because it's all manufactured? There's like such manufacturing costs.
Very important
Where's
question.
the money?
I don't know. It's. I mean, the owners of these big companies, Tacconi, and I love those people. Baby Lock, they're great.
Yeah.
But the Tacconi family, I suspect, is doing fine. I need to know. We should talk about it because I want to know.
Where's the money?
Important
And where
question.
was the money before?
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like industries are about money, right? That's how they survive. That's like why we have them. Like newspapers, couldn't figure out how to make money, so they started to fail. Right. So I find that interesting.
Yes,
And
I'm
also,
struck down. I mean, I have to think about that a lot.
Also, I'm really interested in how personality driven the industry is. That seems interesting to me, and that makes me worry. I worry. Where are my worries? Like, I worry about the people that, like, it's all about their personality, that if they get ill, they don't have any, there's no backup to it. That they're not building empires that are, I mean, Missouri Star did, but they're not building empires that are like again, I mean, I really love Tula. I loved, thank you for inviting her here and all of that. But I also think, like, why, we may not include this in this publicly, but I'm kind of like, why isn't Tula bringing on young artists and like making Tula a brand that is bigger than her? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why aren't they doing, like, you know, why aren't they, you know, same with Leah Day, same with, like, all of these different people that are about their own personalities.
You gotta make it last past the person.
Right, which is what your mom, that's
and
what
they had
did,
a huge
right?
problem when they went away.
Right.
But thank God Fonz 2.0 came along. That's why they were like, please, we'll give you a job.
Right.
You know, because it was really a problem.
Because they had to figure out the transition.
And they closed Quilty when I left. Because who wants to...
Right.
I mean, it's not that I'm irreplaceable, but if you have so much based on a person, what you're saying, it's very difficult.
And so much of this, so all the shops are based on individual shop owners. The you think about the different fabric. I mean,
I think this is social
ones,
media, though.
You know?
And I read such a great thing, New York Magazine. They were talking about millennials, and they went to bat for these. They said, in a culture like we have, what they have been given and what they're making, can you blame these kids, basically, for making themselves
into celebrity, right?
That's all they've fucking got, because there's no jobs and they're saddled with student debt, and like, can you blame them for going to the one product they know that they always have, which is themselves? And I was like, thank you, because that's nice.
Kind of, yeah,
it makes sense.
So with our little project, what we're trying to do, first of all, we're trying to not make it about me, so that, which is kind of like, it's called JustWannaQuilt, and we're trying to diversify, so like have Gigi and Judy and all these different people, and I'm trying to see if it's possible. Can you have a presence and lots of different people, so that it, and also that it's Edith and
I'm just trying to make it seem like it's not just like white women.
Oh no, yeah, right.
Oh, yeah,
no,
Edith.
no.
I know Edith.
Yeah.
Edith is so
great. Right, Edith's great.
That's
so and lots of different people. So, but it's an experiment because we don't see that happening. We don't see it like that's not what's. It's really personality driven and individualistic. So that's the first thing that we're trying to see if that. But second is the Quilting Army, who I love. Totally,
I know that you
They're
love them.
so awesome.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I'm learning that, like, social media is a bit chaotic sometimes. So they do crazy things, and it's all out of love. And I'm curious, like, you have been in the public eye for now a decade. How do you deal with I mean, it's lovely to have people who adore you and to make new friends, and like all of it is fantastically great, right? Like, it's fun and it feels like friends, but also you're a big celebrity. I know you say no, but you're a huge celebrity, a quilt celebrity. How do you deal with the noise and all of this stuff? Because we've only been doing this 9 months, right? Like, this is a crazy 9 months, and you've done it 10 years more probably than that. And with your mom, like, you've grown up with it.
I isolate myself from it. I actually probably am a big wuss, but I have to approve every comment on my blog. I look through them, I read them, yes, but I do not spend much time on them because I can't. It's not that, I don't have time. If it is
it's physical, right? Is it weird? Is it?
And I don't use. I only use Facebook to post that I have blogged.
Yeah.
I do not comment on people's comments unless it's like, you know, something remarkable for some reason. And they're all remarkable. But I mean, I cannot, because it is a monster, and it is not making anything to respond to comments. And I also have avoided a lot of the fray, or stayed out of the way of things, because I staunchly refuse to talk about politics on my blog, which is a huge platform with thousands of readers. But I am so not gonna live. This is what I mean by, like, I don't have time for this stuff.
Yeah.
I will not be in this world and provide a place for people to fight with each other.
No, I agree.
Not on my website.
Yeah.
No. You take that shit somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so I stay. So in a way, it's sort of irresponsible, because I say it's a dialogue with people, and it is. But
it's
I
mediated.
put it out for you,
Yeah.
and you can do what you want with it. So engaging with people, I actually don't do it because I can't. here's what I can give. If you don't want to have it, that is totally okay. But here's what I give. I don't go to the Fons and Porter Facebook website ever. I went once, and the things that the women were saying about me were so devastating. I'll never forget them.
Yeah.
I can't stand that nitwit daughter. Nitwit.
Yeah, that's you.
That
right.
one hurt.
That's totally
Yeah.
you.
And it's like that
right.
she
like,
does
why
not
do
get
people
my
do that?
time.
It's like usually they pick exactly the thing that you care about
Yes,
the most,
exactly.
right? Like
Exactly.
Like if I would describe you as like incredibly intelligent,
Oh,
right,
great.
and incredibly thoughtful, and like putting things together that people aren't putting together. For them to call you that is
I
like
know it.
that, right?
Yeah, it's my worst fear, right? And then, but yeah, it's not good. So I kind of stay out of it, and I am going to end the Facebook account.
You're not the first one.
They're
People are doing it
dismantling
all
our
over
democracy. I mean,
Right.
it's got to stop. I will not. I don't care. And with a publisher or with something, it's bad to not have your thousands of followers. They want to see that. They want to see your social media following. This is my life, and it's over.
Yeah.
I hate it.
A lot of people are bailing.
It's happening more and more. Maybe
really
getting
is.
a critical mass on that. I just won't be
Leah
part of
Day
it.
came on the show to announce that she was not
Really?
on our show to say that she was dismantling all of it.
That's so great.
And
I didn't
she
know
ended.
that.
She hated the Facebook stuff.
Great.
And so she's
Great.
done.
Good for
There's
her.
lots of.
I will
I mean,
email
lots
her.
and lots of people who
Maybe
are
I'll
just.
call her.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's amazing.
Yeah,
she's
she
amazing.
is. She's way
She's
cool.
built this crazy empire.
I was on her podcast, or maybe her video or something. I was so
Yeah.
hungover. It was so terrible. Oh my
funny.
God. I'd never told her
So
that. I
funny.
mean, I was like, well,
That's
Leah,
so funny.
oh God. Oh, I pressed my seams closed.
so
I was really sad.
That's okay.
On the
Right.
note of people being able to like get exactly at like the thing that you're most insecure about and have the most issues with, during a creative writing class that I attend every day, we were discussing this because we were discussing like the image of people and in poetry, and we talked about how when you're in an argument with someone or you want to hurt someone, you have you're way more conscious of who those people are and specific things about them than you are when you're trying to be nice and friendly. And that really stuck with me. And I'm thinking about experiences where I've said hurtful things, because we all have moments that we kind of regret, and then moments where people have said stuff to me that I can't let go of.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting that as humanity, we're far more aware of people when we don't like something.
It's fascinating that anger like focuses our attention.
Yeah.
That's really profoundly interesting. Yes. You're good at saying those profoundly interesting things.
All right. Well,
haven't
we
said
have talked for an hour and a half, and I totally, totally, totally adore you. I cannot wait for your documentary.
Me neither. We have an office on Michigan Avenue.
Very cool.
We have a green-lighted budget that is significant, that I won't talk about, but it's significant. And yes, exactly. I mean, it's a line at this point, but yeah, I know a guy. But I have a full-time assistant producer. I have a producer now. I have to have a call with them tomorrow. And the goal is to pitch this soon. Within the next few months, it's a 10 to 12 part documentary series about the history of the American quilt, with this point of view being we have to take down what people think they know about it, because the truth is way better. And and it'll bring our country together. And I mean that. We all quilt across the divide.
We all quilt.
Everything.
We all quilt.
We all quilt.
It's kind of remarkable.
Yes.
It really is.
And
we all
the
quilt.
idea in the next few months, we'll pitch it to Netflix, Amazon, because like the bicentennial, if we are in a decline, the only way that it's going to not happen is if we goose it with another revival now.
Do you think that with the documentary you'll add patterns and all the other stuff to it?
Yes, we will do some. Yes, we will do some e-commerce, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because, that's the world we live in. I'm not going to, I could release it on a website. mary-fons.com could be this thing. But no, you have to live in the world. But the Amazon Prime or the Netflix thing, it has to be sexy and binge-worthy and fabulous.
Right.
And there's hip-hop music, the intro. I've got Nicki Minaj, I don't have Nicki Minaj yet, but I really want her. I know the music. So it's gonna make people come together, I think. But the idea is to go big. Not put it on PBS. It cannot be on PBS.
And I think that like the whole thing of like it's not your grandmother's quilt is the reason that's phrase has gotten. It's not because we don't. Grandmothers make kick-ass stuff,
yes,
so it's not like right.
That's a bullshit phrase.
It's bad writing.
Like, come on.
It's bad. It's like.
But I think that what they're saying is that there's more to it, and that's really just the shorthand to it, and that's your goal as
Precisely,
well.
yeah.
Is that there's more to it, and it's more interesting.
It's better when you look. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
Sweet.
Anything else?
I loved this so much. Thank you.
Oh my gosh,
Thank
I
you,
can't
Sidney
believe.
and Ron, too.
Yeah.
Really nice.
It's
to
been a
have
pleasure.
You. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, cool. I'll turn it off. It's so sad to turn it off. So you've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. And I'm Elizabeth Townsend Gard. If you like this podcast, keep listening. Also, we have a Facebook group. Come join us. We talk about a lot of things. We also have an Instagram account. And of course, most importantly, I really hope you get a chance to quilt today.